You can laugh at the wrench, the old man said, his eyes fixed on the silent catapult, but you have 47 minutes before this entire flight deck becomes useless. The words cut through the roar of jet engines and snapped every nearby head toward him. Walter Mercer stood behind the yellow safety line on the forward deck of the USS Resolute, one weathered hand holding a short steel wrench scarred by dents, heat stains, and a deep crescent-shaped groove near its jaw. At 78, he looked out of place among the Navy engineers in blue coveralls and bright cranial helmets. His faded brown jacket fluttered in the ocean wind. His white hair refused to stay flat. His boots were old enough to remember decks that no longer existed. 20 yards away, Catapult 3 lay dead beneath the pale Atlantic sky. An E-2D Hawkeye waited behind it, its twin propellers still, its crew sealed inside and watching through the cockpit glass. The launch shuttle had not moved an inch in 3 hours. Lieutenant Ethan Caldwell lowered his diagnostic tablet and stared at Walter as though someone had allowed a tourist into an operating room. Caldwell was 29, clean-cut, sharp-eyed, and known for solving problems before senior officers finished describing them. Today, every screen around him glowed green, every pressure reading sat within tolerance, and every computer insisted the catapult was ready. The steel track disagreed. "Sir, this is a restricted work area," Caldwell said. "Step back behind the barrier." One of the younger engineers noticed Walter's wrench and laughed. "What is that supposed to fix, Chief?" "A tractor." A few others joined him, their voices nearly swallowed by the wind and the low thunder of aircraft idling farther down the deck. Walter did not look at them. He watched a thin line of fluid trembling beside the catapult track. Then he tilted his head, listening as if the massive machine were whispering beneath the steel. Caldwell stepped closer. "We have digital pressure monitors, thermal imaging, and a full diagnostic suite. That tool belongs in a museum." Walter turned the wrench once in his palm. Sunlight caught the old groove cut into its side. "Machines don't care what year a tool was made," he said. "They care whether the hand holding it understands what they're saying." Caldwell's jaw tightened. Above them, the island loudspeaker crackled. Flight operations announced that Catapult 3 had 47 minutes before the forward launch schedule would be cancelled and the deck declared unavailable. The warning rolled across the carrier like distant thunder. Caldwell glanced at the clock on his tablet. The visiting admirals were already waiting. 3 aircraft were scheduled behind the Hawkeye. A failed launch cycle would turn a technical problem into a fleet-wide embarrassment. Walter stepped closer to the safety line, studying the dark slot beneath the shuttle. "You tested it 3 times, he said quietly. Caldwell looked up. That detail had not been announced. "How would you know that?" Walter pointed the scarred wrench toward a faint oil streak no wider than a shoelace. "Because each test pushed the lock tighter." The laughter stopped. Petty Officer Ryan Cole, standing beside the control console, stared at the old man and then at the track. Walter's eyes remained on the machine. "Your computers say the catapult is healthy," he said. "They're not lying." Caldwell folded his arms. "Then what exactly is wrong with it?" Walter finally looked at him. His pale blue eyes held no challenge, only certainty earned somewhere far beyond the reach of a training manual. "The machine isn't broken, Lieutenant." He raised the scarred wrench as the countdown clock changed to 46 minutes. "Someone taught it to protect itself from your mistake." Caldwell's expression hardened, but the wind carried away whatever reply first reached his lips. Around him, the engineering team shifted uneasily. A moment earlier, Walter Mercer had been an old visitor holding an obsolete tool. Now he had named the number of failed tests, identified the direction of the pressure lock, and done both without touching a console. Caldwell turned toward Petty Officer Ryan Cole. "Run the sequence again," he ordered. Ryan hesitated. "Lieutenant, another dry cycle could increase the load on the locking assembly." "The system says the assembly is within tolerance." Caldwell pointed at the control panel. "Run it." Ryan entered the authorization code. Warning lights blinked amber, then changed to green. Deep beneath the non-skid surface of the flight deck, pumps began to turn. A low hydraulic hum traveled through the steel under their boots. The catapult track trembled once. A heavy metallic knock followed, muted but unmistakable. Then everything stopped. The launch shuttle remained frozen. Walter closed his eyes for half a second. "That was the fourth time," he said. Caldwell looked at him sharply. "And it confirmed the control signal is reaching the system." It confirmed the system tried to obey. Walter moved along the yellow line, keeping several feet from the track. He studied the shallow puddles left by the morning washdown. Most shivered evenly from the vibration of the carrier's engines. One narrow patch beside an access plate remained strangely still. Ryan noticed it too. Walter pointed with the wrench. "Pressure is moving around that compartment instead of through it." Caldwell glanced at his tablet. "There is no pressure loss." "I did not say loss." Walter crouched, his knees stiff but his balance steady. He held one end of the wrench close to the deck without making contact. A trapped return line can hold pressure perfectly. That is why every number looks healthy. Caldwell stepped between Walter and the machinery. "You are making assumptions from a puddle." "From the puddle, the sound, and the delay between the pump and the knock." Walter rose slowly. "Your lock is receiving the release command. The bypass is not completing its travel." One of the engineers shook his head. "The position sensor shows fully open." Walter's gaze moved to him. "The sensor reports the actuator arm. It does not report the valve hidden behind it." The young engineer stopped smiling. Ryan pulled up the maintenance diagram on his screen. His finger traced the line from the actuator to the sealed balancing chamber. "He is right about the sensor location," Ryan said. "It confirms movement at the linkage, not inside the valve body." Caldwell's eyes narrowed. "That does not prove the valve is stuck." "No," Walter said. "The fourth test proved it." The ship's loudspeaker crackled again. 41 minutes remained before flight operations closed the forward schedule. Farther aft, engines rose into a deeper roar as another aircraft taxied toward a functioning catapult. Hot exhaust rolled across the deck, carrying the smell of fuel, salt, and sun-warmed steel. Caldwell looked from the countdown on his tablet to the sealed access plate. Opening it would require a manual shutdown, written authorization, and his name attached to every minute of delay. "We are not breaking a maintenance seal because a visitor heard a noise," he said. Walter studied him with an unsettling calm. "Then do not open it for me." He nodded toward the motionless Hawkeye waiting behind the shuttle. "Open it for the crew trusting you to know the difference between a green light and a working machine." Ryan looked down at the access plate. Near one corner, almost invisible beneath the reflected glare, a thin bead of oil slowly pushed upward through the seam. The bead of oil widened until it caught the light like a black thread drawn across the steel. Ryan knelt beside the access plate, careful to remain outside the marked danger zone. "Lieutenant, this seam was dry during the morning inspection," he said. Caldwell stared at it, then at the diagram on his tablet. The pressure readings remained steady. The actuator still showed open. Every digital indicator continued to insist that nothing was wrong. Walter stood a few feet away, the scarred wrench resting against his palm. "The machine is telling you two different stories," he said. "One through the screen, one through the deck." Caldwell exhaled slowly. "And you expect me to trust the deck?" "I expect you to trust evidence." The answer was quiet, but it carried farther than the laughter had. Caldwell looked toward the Hawkeye waiting behind the launch shuttle. Sunlight flashed across the cockpit windows. The aircrew had been sitting there through every failed cycle, sealed inside a machine ready to fly but held prisoner by the steel beneath it. The loudspeaker announced 38 minutes remaining. Caldwell tapped his radio. "Control, suspend all test. Commands on Catapult 3. Place the system in manual safe condition. The reply came at once. Ryan looked up, surprised. Caldwell ignored him and faced Walter. You stay behind the line. You do not touch anything. Walter gave a small nod. That is your deck. The engineering team moved quickly. Power was isolated. Pressure was reduced in stages. Lockout tags were attached and verified. The hum beneath their boots faded until only the carrier's engines and the ocean wind remained. Caldwell signed the authorization on his tablet, each stroke of his finger carrying responsibility. Two engineers loosened the access plate and lifted it clear. A breath of warm, oily air escaped from the compartment below. Ryan aimed a portable light into the narrow space. Pipes, linkages, and sealed housings crowded together beneath the deck. At first, nothing appeared unusual. Caldwell crouched and examined the actuator. The arm is fully extended, he said. Walter leaned forward from behind the line. Look past the arm. Ryan shifted the light. A narrow connecting rod disappeared behind the valve body. Its polished surface should have been centered inside the guide collar. Instead, it sat slightly high, barely the width of a coin. There, Walter said. Caldwell saw it. His expression changed, but only for an instant. Misalignment, Ryan whispered. Not enough to trigger the sensor, Walter said. Enough to stop the valve halfway. Caldwell studied the cramped compartment. How could you know that from the sound? Walter looked toward the track. Because the pump loaded before the knock. If the lock itself had failed, the knock would have come first. One of the engineers glanced at the old wrench. You worked on this class of system? Walter's eyes remained on the hidden valve. Not this class. Caldwell straightened. Then your experience is outdated. Walter turned toward him. Steel still expands. Oil still moves toward open space. A valve still lies when the part measuring it is not the part that failed. Ryan opened the visitor record on his tablet. Walter Mercer, he read softly. Former aviation bosun's mate. Retired. Caldwell held out his hand. Let me see your identification. Walter reached into his jacket and gave him a worn card. Caldwell scanned it. No active certification appeared. No current technical clearance. No authority to advise a flight deck crew. You should be with the veterans tour near the island, Caldwell said. How did you know we ran 3 tests before you arrived? Walter took back the card. I heard them from 2 decks below. Through the hull. A healthy catapult carries 1 clean impact. Yours carried 2 sounds trying to become 1. The countdown changed to 34 minutes. Caldwell looked at the misaligned rod, then at the old man who had found it without a computer. Security will escort you back to the tour, he said. Walter did not argue. He slid the scarred wrench into his leather pouch and turned away. After 2 steps, he stopped. Do not cycle it again, he said. Every attempt is bending that guide farther. Ryan looked down into the compartment. Under the portable light, the metal collar showed a fresh silver line where the rod had begun scraping against it. Walter had taken only 3 more steps when Ryan called after him. Mr. Mercer. The old man stopped, but he did not turn. Ryan stood over the open compartment, his portable light fixed on the bright scrape inside the guide collar. This mark is new, he said. It was not here during the last inspection. Caldwell rose beside him, his face set in the hard calm of an officer trying to keep doubt from becoming visible. Metal contact does not prove his theory. Ryan looked from the silver line to the old man's back. No, sir. But another test could make it worse. The deck loudspeaker announced 32 minutes remaining. Walter faced them again. Wind pressed his faded jacket against his thin frame, revealing the outline of the leather pouch at his side. Caldwell stared at it. What else is in that bag? Walter's eyes narrowed slightly. Tools. Certified tools. Tools that work. One of the younger engineers gave a short laugh. The sound was weaker this time, uncertain at the edges. Caldwell held out his hand. Let me see the wrench. Walter did not move. You already decided it belongs in a museum. I want to inspect it. That is not the same thing. For a moment, neither man yielded. Then Walter opened the pouch and removed the short wrench. Up close, it looked even older. The steel had darkened with decades of oil and salt air. Its handle carried dozens of shallow scratches, but one scar was different. A deep crescent-shaped groove cut across the metal near the jaw, smooth at the edges as though time had polished it. Near the base, beneath layers of wear, two characters remained visible. The letter C and the number 7. Caldwell took it between two fingers. This does not meet any current tool control standard, he said. The jaw is modified. The handle is shortened. There is no readable manufacturer mark. He turned it toward the engineers. This is exactly why unauthorized equipment stays off an active flight deck. A few men smiled. Walter watched without expression. Caldwell ran his thumb across the deep groove. And this damage alone should have retired it years ago. The instant his skin crossed the scar, the bright Atlantic afternoon disappeared from Walter's eyes. The open deck became another deck under a black sky. Red emergency lights washed across wet steel. Steam drifted through narrow passageways beneath the launch track. Walter was 23 again, his hands strong, his hearing sharp enough to separate a valve knock from the endless vibration of the ship. A launch crew waited above while weather closed around the carrier. Somewhere beyond the horizon, for airmen were depending on an aircraft that had not yet left the deck. The catapult would not release. Gauges showed pressure. Linkages showed movement. The machine looked ready to everyone except Walter. He had crawled into a compartment barely wide enough for his shoulders, carrying the same shortened wrench because a standard handle could not turn inside the space. The valve body had shifted under heat. 1/4 turn stood between stillness and flight. He braced the wrench against the fitting. Steel groaned. A burst of hot vapor struck the bulkhead, and a loose metal edge carved the crescent into the handle. Walter did not release it. Above him, the launch officer waited. Below him, the wrench turned. The memory withdrew with the sound of wind snapping against Walter's jacket. Caldwell was still holding the tool. How did it get scarred? Ryan asked. Walter looked at the groove, but his answer came slowly. On a night when the gauges were right and the machine was wrong. Caldwell handed it back with a dismissive motion. That is not an explanation. Walter closed his fingers around the wrench. No, Lieutenant. It is a warning. Ryan zoomed in on the old maintenance diagram. His eyes moved between the narrow access space and the shortened handle. A standard wrench will not clear the aft pipe, he said. One engineer tested the distance with a measuring tool, then shook his head. Less than 4 inches. Ryan looked at Walter's modified wrench. It was the only tool on the deck short enough to reach the hidden fitting. The countdown changed to 30 minutes. Caldwell's gaze settled on the worn C7 mark, and for the first time, he did not laugh. The old wrench remained between Walter's fingers as the deck wind rose around them, carrying the sharp scent of salt, fuel, and heated steel. Caldwell looked at the narrow opening beneath the access plate, then at the modified handle marked C7. For several seconds, the only sound between them was the distant whine of aircraft engines and the steady pulse of the carrier cutting through the Atlantic. You made that tool for this exact space, Ryan said. Walter's thumb rested against the polished scar. For a space close enough to it. Caldwell folded his arms. On what ship? Walter did not answer immediately. His gaze had gone beyond the deck, beyond the pale horizon, toward a night that had never fully released him. The memory returned in pieces. Rain swept sideways across a carrier deck under red emergency lights. The ship rolled through heavy seas, each movement sending water racing along the non-skid surface. Deep below the launch track, young Walter Mercer crouched inside a maintenance compartment where the air felt thick enough to hold. He could hear men calling measurements through the sound-powered phone. Every gauge showed adequate pressure. Every indicator said the release system was ready. Above him, a rescue aircraft waited with its engines turning. Four airmen were stranded hundreds of miles away, their fuel falling while a storm narrowed the path home. The aircraft on Walter's deck carried the equipment needed to find them. It had to launch. The senior technician ordered another reset. Walter stopped him. He had heard a double knock inside the return line, two mechanical sounds arriving where there should have been one. The same broken rhythm Catapult 3 had made 40 years later. He removed a standard wrench, placed it against the fitting, and found the handle too long to move. There was no room for a full turn. No time to remove the surrounding pipework. Walter climbed out, crossed the wet passageway, and found a damaged wrench in the tool locker. He shortened the handle at the maintenance bench, cooled the steel, and carried it back below. The Mark C7 came from the compartment assignment written on the original work tag. He kept the marking after the tag dissolved in oil and seawater. Inside the cramped space, Walter fitted the shortened jaw over the hidden bypass stem. The valve had stopped 1/4 turn from open. Its external linkage had completed the command, leaving the sensor satisfied while the internal gate remained trapped by heat expansion. Walter leaned into the wrench. The fitting resisted. A loose edge of metal scraped across the handle, carving the deep crescent scar. He adjusted his grip and turned again. The valve moved. Pressure rushed cleanly through the line. Above him, the catapult answered with one solid impact. Minutes later, the rescue aircraft climbed into the dark, its lights disappearing beyond the bow. Walter never saw the 4 airmen return that night. He only heard their wheels touch the deck hours later through the steel beneath his bunk. The present came back slowly. Caldwell stood in front of him, waiting. Ryan's face held none of the earlier amusement. "That groove," Ryan said. "It happened during the repair." Walter looked down at the wrench. It happened while the machine was deciding whether to move. The loudspeaker announced 27 minutes remaining. Caldwell glanced toward the waiting Hawkeye, then back to the open compartment. "Even if your experience applies, we cannot use an uncertified tool on this system." Walter slipped the wrench toward his leather pouch. "Then use a certified one." Ryan looked at the 4-inch clearance, then at the full-length tools arranged beside the console. None would fit. Caldwell saw the same truth. His resistance was no longer technical. It was written in the tightness of his jaw and the authorization screen glowing in his hand. Walter watched him without judgment. "The machine does not need you to believe me," he said. "It only needs someone willing to look where the sensor cannot." Ryan lowered the light into the compartment again. Beneath the misaligned guide rod, almost hidden behind the valve housing, he saw a faded stamped marking in the metal. C7. He froze. "Lieutenant," he said, his voice barely audible over the wind. "You need to see this." Caldwell dropped to one knee beside the open compartment and followed Ryan's light. The stamped marking sat beneath a film of oil and age, almost invisible against the valve housing. C7. He looked at the same faded characters on Walter's wrench, then back at the metal below the deck. "That designation should not be here," he said. Ryan enlarged the maintenance diagram on his tablet. This assembly was rebuilt from an older carrier system during the last overhaul. The replacement documentation lists a modern part number, but the housing itself could have been retained. Walter stepped closer to the safety line. The housing was retained. So was the flaw. Caldwell looked up. "You are saying this is the same design you worked on? The same mistake wearing newer paint?" The loudspeaker announced 25 minutes remaining. Wind snapped across the deck, flattening loose straps and sending the smell of hydraulic fluid through the work area. Caldwell studied the diagram again. The internal valve gate was not visible from the opening. Access required loosening the bypass collar and manually checking the stem position. The approved procedure called for a specialized offset tool stored in the carrier's engineering locker. Ryan checked the inventory. His expression tightened. The offset tool was sent ashore for calibration last week. One of the engineers searched another kit and shook his head. Every standard wrench was too long to clear the pipe behind the valve. Walter's shortened tool rested quietly in his hand. Caldwell stared at it as if it had become an accusation. Even if it fits, I cannot authorize an uncertified tool without knowing the actual condition of the valve. Walter pointed toward the thin oil bead rising through the seam. The return pressure is searching for somewhere else to go. That means the gate is holding halfway. The actuator moved. The linkage moved. The valve did not finish. Caldwell replied, there could be a cracked seal. Then the pressure would fall. A blocked return line. Then the pump load would stay high after shutdown. Ryan checked the recorded cycle. The load dropped 2 seconds after the knock. Walter nodded once. Because the bypass tried to open, met resistance, and settled back against the guide. Caldwell looked at the silver scrape on the collar. The evidence aligned too cleanly to dismiss. Still, his thumb hovered over the authorization screen without touching it. Walter watched the hesitation. You are not afraid the wrench will fail, he said. You are afraid it will work. Caldwell's eyes hardened. Watch your tone. Your problem is not pride, Lieutenant. Pride can be useful. Your problem is the report waiting at the end of this decision. The words landed with more force than any insult. Caldwell glanced toward the island, where senior officers were monitoring every lost minute. If he opened the sealed valve and Walter was wrong, the delay would carry his name. If he refused and the schedule failed, that would carry his name too. The difference was that one choice followed procedure, and the other required judgment. Walter looked toward the waiting Hawkeye. A machine can survive an officer protecting his career, he said. A mission usually cannot. Ryan lowered his voice. Sir, we have direct physical evidence of misalignment. We have a tool that fits. We can inspect the stem without cycling the system. Caldwell remained still. The countdown changed to 22 minutes. At last, he pressed his thumb to the screen and signed the manual inspection order. Open the bypass collar, he said. Then he faced Walter. You will advise only. My team will perform the work. Walter gave a calm nod. That is all I asked. 2 engineers positioned themselves at the compartment. Ryan guided the light. Caldwell selected the shortest approved wrench and tried to place it over the hidden fitting. The handle struck the aft pipe before the jaw could seat. He tried a second angle. Metal touched metal, but the tool would not turn. The deck seemed to grow quieter around them. Caldwell withdrew the useless wrench and looked at Walter's scarred one. Hand it to me, he said. Walter did not move. Ask properly. Caldwell held out both hands. The ocean wind pulled at his uniform as the final trace of mockery disappeared from his face. Mr. Mercer, he said, may we use your wrench? Walter placed the old tool across his palms. Now you are ready to hear what the machine has been saying. Ryan guided the scarred wrench into the narrow compartment while Caldwell held the portable light steady. The shortened handle cleared the aft pipe by less than half an inch. Its jaw settled over the hidden bypass stem with the clean certainty of a key entering an old lock. Do not turn it yet, Walter said. Ryan froze. Feel the resistance first. Ryan placed 2 fingers against the handle and applied the slightest pressure. The wrench moved freely for a fraction of an inch, then stopped. Beneath the deck came a faint metallic tick. Walter's eyes sharpened. There it is. Caldwell leaned closer. What is it? The guide is catching before the valve reaches center. Ryan eased the tool back. A thin line of fresh oil appeared around the collar. Walter nodded toward the control console. Pull the archived maintenance history for the housing, not the modern assembly number. Caldwell gave the order. Ryan handed the wrench to another engineer and moved to the tablet. The database returned years of routine inspections, replacement seals, and software updates. Nothing mentioned C7. He changed the search parameters and entered the old marking exactly as it appeared on the valve. For several seconds, the screen remained blank. Then a scanned record surfaced from a retired carrier archive. The document was more than 4 decades old, its text faded and several sections covered by classification blocks. Ryan read aloud. Manual launch restored after bypass gate failure. Modified tool authorized for emergency access. He scrolled lower. The name beneath the repair entry stopped him. Walter James Mercer. Caldwell looked at the old man. Walter's expression did not change. There is more, Ryan said. A second page carried a short operational note. Most of it had been removed, but one line remained visible. Launch-enabled recovery mission. For aircrew returned. The wind moved across the silent group. Even the engineers who had laughed now stood motionless. Caldwell glanced toward the waiting Hawkeye and then back at Walter. You saved 4 men with this repair. Walter's gaze rested on the open compartment. I repaired a valve. The flight crew did the saving. Ryan searched the mission number. A restricted personnel record appeared, listing only initials and service branches. One name had recently been declassified. Thomas Keene. Ryan stared at it. Rear Admiral Thomas Keene. Walter looked toward the island but said nothing. The loudspeaker announced 18 minutes remaining. Caldwell straightened. Continue the inspection. Ryan did not move. Sir, Rear Admiral Keene is aboard for the demonstration. Caldwell's face tightened. That does not change the mechanical problem. No, sir. But he may know why this housing was preserved and why Mr. Mercer was invited onto the ship. Walter's visitor badge had listed him only as part of the veterans group. No rank. No special clearance. No explanation. Ryan stepped away from the compartment and opened a secure communication channel. Caldwell started to object, then stopped. The wrench, the stamped housing, and the archived record had already said more than procedure could erase. The call passed through 2 offices before a command aide answered. Ryan identified himself and explained the failure in careful terms. Then he gave Walter's name and the marking on the tool. The voice on the other end went silent. Repeat that designation, the aide said. C7, Ryan replied. The wrench has the same mark. There was movement in the background, followed by a second voice, older and firm. Is Walter Mercer standing on my flight deck? Ryan looked at the old man. Yes, Admiral. The reply came without hesitation. No one removes him. No one cycles that catapult again without his approval. Put me through to the deck circuit now. Ryan activated the speaker. Rear Admiral Keene's voice rolled across the work area. Lieutenant Caldwell, you have 17 minutes. Listen carefully to Mr. Mercer. 43 years ago, that man heard a failure every instrument on the ship missed. Walter lowered his eyes to the scarred wrench. Keene's voice softened, but only slightly. And I was one of the 4 men who came home because he did. For a moment, no one on the flight deck moved. Rear Admiral Thomas Keene's voice remained on the open circuit, steady and unmistakable above the wind. Caldwell looked at Walter as though the old man had changed shape without taking a single step. The engineers who had laughed now avoided the scarred wrench in Ryan's hand. Admiral, Caldwell said, the valve guide is misaligned, and the approved offset tool is unavailable. Then use the tool that fits, Keene replied. Mr. Mercer understands that assembly better than anyone standing there. Walter lifted his eyes toward the speaker. Thomas, this is not the same ship. No, Keene said. But it is the same sound. The old familiarity in the exchange silenced the last trace of doubt around them. Keene continued, Lieutenant, I am not ordering you to ignore safety. I am ordering you to recognize expertise when it is standing in front of you. Place Mr. Mercer in technical control of the inspection. Caldwell's jaw tightened, then relaxed. He looked at the authorization screen, at the open compartment, and finally at Walter. Mr. Mercer, he said, what do you need? Walter stepped to the edge of the marked area. Full pressure isolation confirmed twice. Light on the guide collar. One hand on the wrench. No force until I say. Caldwell repeated the instructions to the team without changing a word. Ryan returned the tool to the fitting. The jaw seated beneath the pipe. Walter crouched beside him, close enough to hear the metal but careful not to cross into the compartment. Take up the free movement, he said. Ryan eased the handle forward. The wrench moved, then met resistance. Stop. Back 1/8 of a turn. Ryan obeyed. A faint click rose from below. Walter listened. Now lift the handle slightly while turning forward. Ryan adjusted the angle. The scarred wrench pressed against his glove. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the hidden stem shifted with a soft, gritty scrape. A narrow stream of oil slipped around the collar and stopped. That is the guide centering, Walter said. Caldwell watched the pressure indicator. Return pressure just dropped by 12 pounds per square inch. Good. Another 1/16 of a turn. Ryan moved the wrench. The valve answered with one clean metallic knock. Walter's shoulders lowered. There. The countdown showed 13 minutes. Caldwell ordered a visual confirmation. The linkage now sat level inside the collar, and the fresh silver scrape no longer touched the upper edge. Every engineer could see it. The machine had not needed a new control unit or another software reset. It had needed a quarter turn in a place the sensor could not see. Keene's voice returned over the circuit. Walter, are you satisfied? Walter studied the line, the oil seam, and the position of the stem. Satisfied enough to test it under low pressure. Caldwell looked at him. You are not certain. Walter stood slowly. Certainty is for reports written afterward. Good mechanics work with evidence. Caldwell gave the order for a controlled pressure test. Power returned in stages. Pumps began to hum beneath the deck. This time, the vibration traveled evenly through the steel. No double knock followed. Ryan watched the readings climb. Pressure stable. Bypass responding. Lock command synchronized. The launch shuttle remained still, but the system no longer sounded trapped. Keene said, I am coming down to the deck. Walter glanced toward the island. You do not need to. I have needed to for 43 years. The circuit closed. Caldwell removed his helmet, stepped in front of Walter, and held the scarred wrench out with both hands. I was wrong about the tool, he said. Walter accepted it without triumph. You were wrong about the man holding it. Caldwell met his eyes. Yes, sir. The loudspeaker announced 10 minutes remaining. Walter slid the wrench back into the leather pouch and looked toward the silent track. Do not thank me yet, he said. The machine has only stopped resisting. Now we find out whether it remembers how to move. The countdown reached 9 minutes as Caldwell authorized the low-pressure cycle. Across the deck, signal lights changed from red to amber. Ryan stood at the control console with both hands visible above the switches, waiting for Walter's final word. The old man listened to the pumps build beneath the steel. The sound came clean this time, a single rising hum without the trapped knock that had followed every earlier attempt. Walter looked at Caldwell. "Bring it to 20%. Caldwell relayed the order. Pressure climbed. The track shivered under the afternoon sun. 1 second passed. Then another. The launch shuttle moved less than an inch and stopped. Several engineers drew breath at once. Caldwell looked toward Walter, but the old man did not react. He was watching the oil seam beside the access plate. It remained dry. "Again," Walter said. 30%. The pumps deepened. The shuttle crept forward 3 inches, smooth and silent, then settled. Ryan stared at the readings. Bypass response is synchronized. Lock position confirmed. Walter nodded. Now it trusts the line again. The loudspeaker announced 7 minutes remaining. Caldwell requested permission from flight operations for a full unloaded stroke. The answer came back immediately. Authorized. Clear the track. The engineers withdrew behind the safety boundary. Walter stood beside Ryan, one hand resting on the leather pouch at his hip. Far above them, the carrier's flag snapped straight in the wind. Caldwell raised his arm. Initiate full test. Ryan pressed the control. Pressure surged through the system. A sharp hydraulic hiss traveled beneath the deck. The shuttle trembled. For one suspended moment, it remained still. No one spoke. Then the catapult moved. The shuttle shot down the track in a blur of steel, its mechanical roar rolling across the bow and out over the Atlantic. The sound struck the deck crew like a wave. Some stepped forward without realizing it. Others simply stared at the empty track as the return system drew the shuttle back into position. Ryan looked at Walter with open disbelief. Caldwell lowered his arms slowly. The countdown showed 5 minutes and 40 seconds. Flight operations cleared the Hawkeye for launch. The aircraft rolled forward, its twin propellers turning into silver discs. Deck crews moved with renewed precision, guiding it onto the restored shuttle. Walter stepped farther back from the line. The engines rose. Wind pressed against his jacket and pulled at his white hair. Caldwell stood beside him, no longer trying to place himself between the old man and the machine. "You knew it would work," he said. Walter kept his eyes on the aircraft. "I knew the valve was free. The rest still had to earn itself." The launch officer lowered his hand. Power gathered. The catapult released. The Hawkeye surged forward and lifted from the bow into open sky. Its landing gear folded as it climbed over the ocean. No one cheered immediately. The engineers remained still, watching the aircraft become smaller against the blue. Then the island door opened, and Rear Admiral Thomas Keene stepped onto the deck. He crossed the distance without ceremony, ignoring the officers waiting to brief him. He stopped in front of Walter. For several seconds, the two men looked at each other across 43 years. Keene's gaze dropped to the leather pouch. "You kept it." Walter drew out the scarred wrench. "It kept being useful." Keene smiled once, then came to attention and raised a formal salute. Around them, Caldwell, Ryan, and every engineer on Catapult 3 followed. Walter did not smile. He returned the salute with the quiet precision of a man remembering every deck he had crossed and every voice carried through steel. When the moment ended, Caldwell looked at the wrench. "What should we put in the maintenance report?" Walter placed it back in the pouch. "Write that the sensor worked." Caldwell waited. Walter turned toward the moving sea. "And write that someone finally listened to what it could not measure."